Okay. Sexual violence is also a major problem in PNG, and as with domestic violence, accurate figures are hard to come by. Okay, research undertaken by the PNG Law Reform Commission in 83-84 revealed that 2/3 of men in PNG, 95% of men in the Highlands and 57% of rural women considered it acceptable for husbands to beat their wives. 67% of rural women and 56% of urban women reported experiencing domestic violence. That violence is now normalised in PNG is evidenced by the following courting song, and I put that up there because I think it's really telling. Family and sexual violence present as key justice challenges for PNG, not least because most of the cases involving women complainants are often dealt with informally or by the village courts, which are the most accessible form of justice in rural areas. Indeed, the formal justice system is insufficiently accessible for rural people, especially rural women. Currently, the village courts deal with an estimated 600,000 cases per year. In many cases, village courts are convened by untrained or poorly trained magistrates, typically male leaders, who utilise customary law to arbitrate or resolve disputes. This means that women are often deprived of their legal rights, as cases are heard and resolved at the expense of women's human rights. For example, rape and sexual assault are typically treated as offences against the woman's male relatives, with compensation paid to them, the male relatives, to restore harmony within the community. So needless to say, this overlooks the victims' experiences and denies women their rights to justice in the courts. Indeed, women who lay complaints against their attackers are often forced or pressured to withdraw such complaints once compensation has been paid. Village courts often tend to exceed their jurisdiction as well. So, for example, they don't have jurisdiction to deal with serious criminal cases or to hear cases involving serious physical assault, sexual assault, crimes against children, or indeed murder. But because they're the most accessible court, and most people, you know, in rural areas don't have access to district or national courts, you know, there's pressure on the village courts to deal with such cases through customary means, and so they often do it, you know, thereby exceeding their jurisdiction. Moreover, village courts often typically insist on medical reports, which must be paid for before offenders are to be prosecuted. And victims of violence are often required to pay a fighting fee, anywhere between 20 and 200 kina, at health centres before accessing treatment. So this makes it doubly difficult for women. So if a woman's been assaulted or is a victim of violence and she turns up to the health centre seeking medical treatment, she's often you know, required to pay this 200 kina fight fee. The fight fee was instituted at health centres to basically deter against tribal fighting. So in cases where men were fighting against each other and they got an arrow wound or something, you know, historically during the colonial period, they would be forced to pay a fighting fee. So the idea was it was meant to be a deterrent. But nowadays it's actually used as a means of sort of denying women access to medical treatment, and then, you know, sort of by default denying them access to the justice system, because the justice system requires that they have medical reports detailing the nature of their injuries, etc. I suppose, you know, a range of things that conspire against women being able to seek treatment and access to justice. I suppose just to conclude, looking forward, you know, or, you know, making some key points, one of the really big issues that we're dealing with in a place like PNG is that masculinities in PNG have been radically transformed over the space of 50 years. And this has meant very real transformations in patterns of violence, in that it's changed relations between successive generations of men. And these shifts have been to the detriment of women and girls and have given rise to alarming rates of violence, to family and sexual violence. If gender-based violence is to be seriously tackled and eliminated, men and boys need to be included in the project so that they're part of the solution and not just seen as part of the problem. Indeed, it's now more widely appreciated that if gender-based violence is to cease, fundamental changes are needed in terms of men's attitudes and beliefs about women and their roles in society. it's also the case that the relationship between violence and masculinity and gender needs to be understood and challenged. And I think that's a key thing. You know, what we've seen is these massive shifts over a really short period of time, and a lot of the sort of policy response and the way that it's almost considered as off limits, like, you know, sort of men sort of invoke culture and custom to sort of say, you know, this is how it is, but it hasn't always been like that. And so sort of trying to think about, you know, sort of challenging some of those notions is really important. Key challenges moving forward include identifying, you know, sort of, I suppose, more positive masculine characteristics and developing culturally appropriate interventions and alternative non-violent, trying to make alternate non-violent masculinities mainstream. And obviously this is an area where there's, you know, a huge amount of need for further research and things, because it's just, you know, a lot of what's been going on in this space, you know, there's been a lot of investment in the space, but, you know, not much sort of change. And it does seem to be, you know, the really key thing that sort of influences how people, you know, just experience their daily lives, whether or not they feel safe and secure to be able to go to school or to access a health centre if they need to, because people are making choices on a daily basis as, you know, not to go and seek health treatment because it's too dangerous for them to, you know, to sort of to move about and things like that. So, yeah, and I think that, as I said, I think that family, the sort of stuff that we're seeing, the changes that we've seen, the cultural shifts are contributing to the high levels of family and sexual violence. But those same things we're seeing play out in terms of, you know, intergenerational conflict between men. It's playing out in terms of electoral violence and other sorts of things that we would consider, I suppose, more broadly as some of the bigger sort of security issues. So I think they're all quite interrelated.